Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. The topic that set the internet on fire this week is whether UK's stance on Ukraine is going to change based on what America does next. And we're talking obviously in 2025. And here with us today, we have Cormac Smith to help us answer that question.
Good morning. My name is Cormac Smith. Between 2016 and 2018, as a British diplomat, I was embedded in Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Mikhailov's Kaplosha as a special communication advisor to Pavlo Klimkin, who was then the foreign minister. I fell in love with Ukraine, made many great friends there, and for the last 3 years, I have been appearing as often as possible on radio and TV channels and writing some articles to try and support my friends in Ukraine and to try and get a balanced truth out to combat the absolute avalanche of Russian disinformation that we face in the West.
Yeah, that keeps getting larger and larger every day. And you have also become a very good friend of our channel recently, so it's very nice to see you back here.
It's always a pleasure to join UATV.
Amazing. So today, I guess all of the topics that we might be talking about are quite heavy and quite big. So let's start with the, I guess, least severe one is, do you see a shift in attitude towards Ukraine in the UK general public and in the UK politicians since Trump got elected?
No, I don't. And I'm going to be optimistic, but I think Britain is as committed to Ukraine as we have been for the last 3 years. It's interesting listening to radio phone-ins and so forth when you get people calling in, and there seems to be the majority of people seem to be more informed, and generally, I think people can see that there must be a just peace for Ukraine, and the majority of people, despite the Russian lies, know that Ukraine has been illegally invaded and its people horribly treated by Russia. There is some question over. We got a new government in Britain this summer. Changed from Conservative to Labour under the Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Yeah. There has been some nervousness among myself and other friends of Ukraine as to what that would mean, but certainly all of the words and rhetoric which has come out of the current UK government suggests that Britain still stands absolutely firmly behind Ukraine. You will know that there's a meeting today which has been attended by David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, in Brussels, where President Zelensky, I believe, is also attending, and leaders from both EU and NATO nations to discuss what Ukraine's needs are and how we can put Ukraine in the strongest possible position going into 2025. The big unknown is obviously Donald Trump in the United States, who has famously said he will end this war within 24 hours coming power.
He also famously recently said that he didn't realize this before, but realizes it now, that it's going to take a lot more than 24 hours. And he's quite surprised that it's not as easy as he thought it would be. So that's kind of at least that's a good shift. I honestly think, I actually had this conversation recently on this segment with someone else where we kind of came to the conclusion that Donald Trump sort of says these things, but he hasn't really thought about it, nor has he really deeply researched what he's talking about. So I think that his opinion and his sort of rhetoric is going to change. So is his stance, because I don't think he quite understands deeply what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. So I guess we will see on that. Keir Starmer, however, I think I'm personally very, not like surprised, but I'm very happy with him, because I think that the fear was that a Labour government would be less hawkish on Russia and a Labour government would be more geared towards peace talks. But Keir Starmer's stance so far has been incredibly amazing, and he has been very stern on Russia. He has been advocating for a lot more support for Ukraine. The things that he has been saying publicly have been very, very good and very correctly put in terms of what rhetoric we should be using and sort of how we should be gearing it towards, pressuring Russia, not Ukraine. and I think he's been very fantastic. I think he's exceeded my expectations, to be honest. Not that, my expectations count, provided I'm not in the UK, but I think he's doing a lot better than I expected him to do in Ukraine.
Well, Yulia, one thing that I would note, the day after our general election here in the summer, when Keir Starmer made his first speech to the nation, one of the things that he thanked the outgoing prime minister for was how he had been kept very, very closely informed on what the British government was doing for Ukraine, and it was very, very clear over the last nearly 3 years that we had complete unanimity across the three main parties of Labour, the Liberal Democrats, and the Conservative Party on support for Ukraine. So we have not, I think in fairness, we have not seen anything yet to suggest that this Labour government will weaken off. We are hoping that they will get very, very soon to 2.5% defence spending. In truth, with what Europe is facing into over the next 2 or 3 years, that probably needs to be a lot higher, and we probably need to be taking our lead from the countries in your neighbourhood, the Baltic nations and Poland in particular. Baltics, you will know, I think Lithuania is just approaching 3%. Estonia and Latvia are now around 3.5%, correct me if I'm wrong. And Poland, of course, is approaching 5%.
Poland.
And they are talking very, very hawkishly. And, one of the things I started saying very early on in my days in Ukraine, and I should say at 62, I've been a student of history and international affairs all my life. But in many ways, my real education about your part of the world started in 2016 when I went out to Kyiv to work for the Ukrainian government. And I started saying pretty soon after I went out that really the world needs to see Russia through Ukrainian eyes and through the eyes of others in what I refer to as the Eastern neighborhood. And I started learning this, sitting up very late at night talking to friends who had grown up under communism, and they were making it very clear to me that this was what they were fighting to get away from.
Yeah, I think that we started seeing or started looking at Russia through Ukrainian prism or Ukrainian lens a little too late, but it's better late than never. I do agree that Britain has always had an amazing stance on Ukraine and has always been one of our greatest allies and has taken a lead. I think that the number for defense for 2025 now is sort of the number they're looking at, and the number that they're trying to talk about is 3%, not 2.5. I think it keeps increasing with how much danger Russia keeps posing. I think Poland is doing a great job. They've militarized and they've really been spending a lot of money on defense. It's probably the only combat-ready military in Europe at the moment, like a really equipped military to face Russia. There was one of the British generals the other day who said that, the UK would, in its current state, would last about 6 months against a Russian invasion, which is quite a terrifying figure, to be honest. And I think that that should be a wake-up call for the UK military complex to sort of, to do something about it and to advance, because of course, it's not a great figure to hear, but it's reality. And I think that every European country should face that reality. We're underprepared and we should be preparing. I do. As I said earlier, I do think that the UK has always been a very reliable, very reliable and a very supportive partner to Ukraine. But I think it's just more of like the rhetoric about the Labour government, because, Labour is usually more pacifist. So I think that everyone was kind of scared that once Tories go, Labour will be a little less inclined to be very stern. But yeah, I'm very happy that that's not the case, and that the UK continues its stance and also constantly continues to progress in its dialogue with other countries about how much more should be done to defeat Russia. I wonder if the UK is going. So there is this talk that Donald Trump has been having where he said that he might rescind the long-range weapons strikes into Russia that Biden has allowed Ukraine to do. Do you think if that happens, the UK will rescind its permission for Ukraine as well?
Well, this is very hard to know, because it was very, very clear that while the Biden administration was not allowing the ATACMS to be used. They were also putting a halt on the use of both Storm Shadow and the French version of Storm Shadow Scalp on the basis, I understand, that they contained
American
US
components.
components in them. So I think it is very, very concerning that Donald Trump has come out and expressed concern about this, and it's really difficult to know. I mean, Donald Trump has never been more powerful as a man, and he obviously has at his fingertips the world's most powerful military machine. So there is a reality in realpolitik that the UK possibly feels that it can only go so far in defying a Donald Trump, and other European nations will be in a similar position. My own view is, and has been for over a year now, that I said almost a year ago that I believed America was likely lost as the reliable security partner that we have known in the West for many decades, and that this need, you talk about wake-up calls, Yulia, we've had too many wake-up calls and we haven't really woken up. We should have put our industries on a war footing 3 years ago. We didn't. We have started to do that this year. And, you know, I don't want to dampen down optimism on Keir Starmer, but there are now indications that they are looking. The UK is currently at 2.3%, and there are indications that we are now looking at getting to 2.5%, but only in a recent interview on a national radio program this week, Keir Starmer refused to say if he would commit to raising to 3%. And, you know, with the sort of all the military men, and in particular the retired security and diplomatic people and military people are telling us, when they are, you know, free of the chains of having to mirror what the administration is saying, is we are simply not ready to fight. I mean, it was recently General Sir Roland Walker, as head of the British Army, said very pointedly that the British Army was not ready to fight, and if we're not ready to fight, we're not ready to deter. And the problem that I see it is, Russia and Russians have a very, very different attitude to war than we do in the West, or than you do in Ukraine. They have absolutely no compunction in throwing tens of thousands of their own people into a meat grinder to achieve their aims, whereas, and indeed part of the Russian myth is that we are soft and weak and decadent in the West, but certainly there is some truth in that. With the exception of nations in the eastern neighborhood, there is an unwillingness to go into a war mindset, which is what we really need to do in the West at the moment. And people simply do not want to realize that fact. And if we don't, it's going to cost us an awful lot more tomorrow than it will today. You know, I have a favorite saying. It's our money and guns today, or our daughters and sons tomorrow. And I am absolutely clear on that. I have no doubt about it. And my fear is that despite some very good rhetoric and some very warm words, that most of the countries to the west of Europe still are not realizing the situation we are in. And if they have to choose between butter and bombs, they're going to choose butter. They're going to choose their standard of living. And the truth is, if we are to raise our defense spending in our very wealthy, comfortable Western democracies to the level that we need to defend ourselves, something is going to have to give. If we spend more money on defense, we are going to have to spend less money on other services. And I'm just not sure that sufficient of the public in what are democracies, that of course is the big difference to ourselves and Russia, are ready to do that. You in Ukraine and the Baltics and Poland are very different, because you grew up with Russia and you know exactly what Russia is about. So I go back to my point, and I would appeal to everyone. We really have got to give Ukraine more respect and credibility and the other countries in the eastern neighborhood, because you're the ones that really know what this threat is. We have failed for 30 years. We thought in 1991, with the fall of the Soviet Union, that Russia would rush forward to embrace our form of democracy. It was very clear from early on that that was never going to happen. But Western leaders seem to have willfully ignored that fact, and we're now at the 11th hour, or 2 minutes to midnight, or whatever way you want to phrase it. And again, we talk about wake-up calls. The wake-up calls are we've had wake-up calls for years, and it's getting very, very late in the day.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, so that brings me to that kind of ties into this point. So there is a lot of conversation about peace talks, right? It seems like a lot of Western European leaders want to believe that that's possible, and they're again pushing towards peace talks. I personally think that this is the time where we either beat Russia or Russia beats us, and the more we pressure Russia, the more likely it is for it to collapse. What is the general sort of attitude towards peace talks in the UK, and do you think that what does UK think about freezing the conflict? Because of course, I mean, some Western European countries think it's a good idea. We in Ukraine know that it's just another Minsk II or just another 2014, and we're just going to wait for an attack later. What do you think is the general mood in the UK?
I think there's far too many people who think that Russia cannot be beaten, that Ukraine cannot win, and that anything which stops the current killing is preferable to it going on. There is still a lack of ability to realize the very basic truth that a very good friend of mine, a senior Ukrainian diplomat, said to me one morning in a call like this. He was in Brussels at the time. And he said, it's very simple, Cormac. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. Now, Yulia, you and I know that if the conflict is frozen on current lines, or whatever the deal that's hammered out, and we know that Russia will start any negotiations with a maximalist demand, probably not just to keep the land they want, but to have the rest of the 4 oblasts which they have
their goal
declared
is for
forever.
2025. Yeah.
And Russia will use any pause in the fighting to simply rebuild their forces. We know, and how many more lessons does the world need? We know that Russia negotiates in bad faith. We know that Russia, if it's in relation to Ukraine, certainly always breaks its word. We know Russia cannot be trusted. They lie on an industrial scale. And, the old thing, even before I talked about my education, my real education starting in 2016, 2014, actually, when I started going to former communist countries to speak and to work with people on government communications. But long before that, I had worked out the truth that you can only deal with Russia from a position of strength and power. So this rush to negotiations there are a number of points to it. What part of the people who are saying that we must give land for peace, what part of, if we went to the United States or if we went to Britain, what 20% of our land would we be willing to give up for no good reason? And also, and most importantly, abandon the people that live in that part of our countries to the absolute barbarism and the rapes and the tortures and the murders and the kidnaps of children and everything that you and I know is going on a daily basis. So we still have a fundamental failure to respect Ukraine and to give Ukraine real agency. There is this feeling that the great powers can get together and make a deal about Ukraine, as Neville Chamberlain did with Hitler at the Munich conference in 1938, and got off the plane famously waving a piece of paper saying "Peace in our time." We know where that led. That was a deal, That was a deal which Neville Chamberlain and the French premier, whose name evades me at the moment, that was a deal they did with Adolf Hitler. And so when Donald Trump constantly talks about deals, and he only said earlier this week, there's got to be a deal, this really worries me, because anything that can be seen as a victory for Russia will embolden Putin. It will embolden other despots around the world. And as you and I know, it will simply give them time to recuperate their forces. And the final point that I would say, Russia and Putin are probably weaker than they have ever been. They're taking the most horrendous battlefield losses. Their economy is in free fall. There has never been a better time for the Western allies to come together and break Russia's back.
Exactly.
And if we miss the chance now, we risk snatching defeat, should I say, from the jaws of victory. So that is my real fear, that we haven't, despite a lot of, I spent 20 years writing speeches and writing statements and writing press releases. I know all about warm words, but there's a great fear in me that these warm words are not backed up with a clear realization of what for us will be a relatively cheap and easy solution today will mean for Ukraine today and tomorrow, and for us tomorrow.
Well, so
I'm not.
some of the big Western democracies, right? I would say like the democracies at the forefront of the fight, financially at least. Macron mentioned peace troops. Then this morning, actually, Scholz said that Germany rather said that they're not opposed to the idea of peacekeepers in Ukraine, right? Kaja Kallas came out the other day and said that that talking about peacekeepers is premature because needing peacekeepers entails there being peace, and Russia is not interested in peace. What's your idea on that? Because it seems like some Western European countries think that if they put their troops on the gray zone line between Russia and Ukraine, that's going to somehow maintain peace.
Well, the first thing it does is it hands a victory to Vladimir Putin, to go back to my earlier point. Anything which leaves Putin with land which he has illegally taken and violated, and violated the people on that land, and leveled entire cities to rubble, as in Mariupol and many, many others, Putin will take that. And we know he has full control of his media and his state communications. He will present that as a victory to his people. And, he will go away and rebuild. There's a saying we have: when somebody is down, it's time to put the boot in. And it's time to put the boot in on Russia at the moment. But I don't hear very many Western leaders talking in those terms. So I'm concerned at the moment.
Yeah, I think that with Donald Trump becoming president and his rhetoric of deals and peace and all of this stuff, I think a lot of leaders are sort of trying their best to also get in on that and to also promote that rhetoric, that maybe it's time to sort of cut a peace deal and it's time to stop the killing, which, a peace deal is not going to stop the killing. We've talked about it a million times. People in the occupied territories in Ukraine are not going to be not killed or not tortured or not persecuted or not sent to the Russian army or not re-educated or not indoctrinated, right? Or not, not harmed for speaking Ukrainian or identifying as a Ukrainian, right? So that's not necessarily what it is. I just think that there is this sort of push, and it certainly comes with Donald Trump's rhetoric within Western leaders to try and organize a peace deal. And I think that that's a very wrong direction in which Europe is thinking right now, because it's this kind of like penultimate time, 2025, where Russia is very weak. And if we get stronger and we invest more into defeating Russia, we will defeat it. But if we keep going at the same pace or we decrease it, then Russia is going to defeat us because it's just going to have time to get stronger.
Yulia, I agree. And something I would say, there is a concerning, and I would even say unedifying, rush of many Western leaders to curry favor with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And, recently, and I have, as you will know, I have the greatest of respect for the three Baltic states, but it was recently the foreign minister of Estonia, I believe, came out and said that that Donald Trump had the opportunity to be seen in the same light, to be a Winston Churchill if he could bring peace to Ukraine. And I've got to say that was a misguided, that was a very misguided comparison. The comparison. Donald Trump is no Winston Churchill.
Not at all.
And Winston Churchill, in 1940, when Britain stood alone and their backs to the wall, Winston Churchill talked about the only aim being victory, and victory at all costs, because without victory there would be no survival. So Winston Churchill in 1940 was talking in terms that Ukrainians will understand, and he was using words that we could very well imagine coming out of the mouth of Vladimir Zelensky. But, I think the choice that Donald Trump has is to be a Neville Chamberlain and do a deal with Putin as Neville Chamberlain did a deal with Adolf Hitler, or he can be a Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the president of the United States up to close to the end of the war. And, Roosevelt eventually, not at first, but eventually did sufficient to enable the Allies to win, first with Lend-Lease. America didn't come into, as you know, America didn't actually enter the Second World War until 2.5 years after it begun, but it was America's eventual entry into the war that allowed the evil of Nazism to be defeated. Now, the one thing that I would say about Donald Trump undoubtedly has it within his power to see Russia defeated. My question is, what does Donald Trump really want? And my fear is that with his America First policy, Donald Trump has made no secret in the past of his disdain for a united Europe and for the European Union, because he sees in that a economic bloc that the United States can't dominate or pick off. So my concern would be that Donald Trump may not want to see a strong Europe, and Donald Trump may want to see some sort of a mythical reset in terms of relations between East and West. And that desire for a reset is very, very misplaced. I mean, there's always been a fear of defeating Russia and a fear of the Russian Federation falling apart. The truth is, we can't prevent that. All we can do is prepare for it. We can usher forward its collapse and the defeat of Russia, or we can backpedal and we can talk about deals, and we can deny agency to the Ukrainians, which is what I hear all the time. And we will all have a much bigger problem in 2 to 3 years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I've been
saying this for 3 years, for longer actually, but it's, yes, I hear more people saying it now, but I'm just not sure that we're there yet.
I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly, of course. I think that, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm no fan of Boris Johnson, but I feel like one of the things that I wish to see from the UK is sort of the same spirit as the UK had, leading and being at the forefront of decision making and problem solving in this war, in the same sort of light as Boris Johnson was in the first days of the invasion. You know, the first foreign leader to come to Kyiv, the first foreign leader to advocate for certain things. I really hope that Keir Starmer sort of takes on this role of leading the fight within Western Europe, because obviously the US is not going to be leading the fight. I feel like maybe Ukraine is number 14 on Trump's agenda in the list of priorities, and certainly nowhere high enough. So let's hope that 2025 for the UK is going to be a year of, further defense spending and, I guess, understanding of the threat within the civil society and the political society of the country, and hopefully a lot more stringent decisions on Russia.
Can I say something on that? You know, like you, as somebody who lives, works, and pays my taxes in the UK and has done for over 37 years, and this is my home. I love this country, and I've represented this country abroad as both a diplomat and when I was a younger man as an international athlete. Been very proud to do so. I was no fan of most of Boris Johnson's domestic policies, but I was a huge fan and hugely proud, and went on air many times to say it, of the stance that he took on Ukraine. And I was always remarked on what a Ukrainian diplomat friend told me in the early days back in 2022, I'm sorry, that it wasn't just what Britain was giving Ukraine in terms of armaments, whether it was NLAWs or later Challenger tanks or Storm Shadow. It was the leadership role that Britain was playing behind the scenes to encourage and to marshal other European countries to support Ukraine. Now, you know, I don't really want to get too political. I think Brexit is something which has damaged the UK hugely. That's my view. There are many who will disagree with it. But something I've been told by many people is one of the things which has kept UK in the game with Europe and kept a lot of respect for the UK has been the stance that the UK has shown on Ukraine over the last 3 years. And I am absolutely convinced that whether we stay out of the European Union or whether we ever start to move back closer, that when it comes to defence, Britain has an absolutely key role to play. So yeah, I very much hope that we will, as we've already discussed, and I am, you know, I'm saying at the moment that I believe that we are, but I very much hope that the UK continues in the same vein that we have seen in the last 3 years. All the indicators are that we will do this. The unknown for all of us is Donald Trump. What I said earlier on, that there might be a silver lining for Ukraine in the election of Donald Trump, in that it will make European leaders finally wake up and realize that Europe has to stand on its own 2 feet. And remember, if the combined economies of Europe are over 10 times bigger than the economy of the Russian Federation, there is no reason why we cannot stand up, but we have left it very, very late. And despite the great wealth we have, that will not come without some element of pain to our citizens and our taxpayers, because if we spend more on defense, it will mean we will spend less elsewhere. So we really need to see some very, very strong leadership to marshal our citizens to accept the reality that there is a clear and present danger, and this is not something that we can keep burying our heads in the sand about. I would just mention I have Friedrich Merz, who is the most likely successor to Olaf Scholz in Germany, has given us all some particular cause for hope in his words what he has said, and he has said, that he would, if he got into power, he would give Putin 24 hours before he flooded Ukraine with Taurus, some of their weapons, which they need. Which of course Scholz has only recently again reiterated that he will not give Taurus to Ukraine. So I mean that's another discussion completely. But I still fear in the West that the people who are in power have not yet grasped the full reality of where we are. And of course, we're democracies, and Russia and other despots always use our democratic values against us. And the weakness of democracies is to make really, really big changes. We need to bring our people with us. And with the spread of populism across Europe, and we know that Russia's Russia's fingers tends to be involved in populist movements in Europe, in countries across Europe, and this is something which weakens Europe as well. And we know that many of these populist parties tend to be far more sympathetic, shall we say, towards the Kremlin line. And we have the exact same in the UK, where Nigel Farage of the Reform Party came out only a couple of months ago and parroted the Kremlin myth that really it was the expansion of NATO, which was the ultimate cause of Russia invading Ukraine.
Well, there are always going to be politicians that are, either sympathetic towards Russia or sympathetic towards Russia because they're sympathetic towards the money Russia pays them. There's always going to be politicians like that in the Western world trying to change the narrative and stepping up for Russia, mostly for money, right? And as damaging as they are, at least they're a minority in the world right now, and that's heartwarming. So I think coming into the new year, I think it's very important that we continue not giving up and continuing our disinformation fight and pushing European politicians to be firm and firmer. Thank you so much for your commentary today. I always enjoy our conversations, and I'm very glad that we agree on the subject that I think Europe needs to step up. I think 2025 is an important year, and it's a year where we make it or break it. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we don't break it, we make it.
Yulia, it's always a pleasure to join you.
Well, hopefully this conversation was as interesting to you as it was to me. And hopefully, if you would like to hear more conversations like this in the future, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss out next episodes. And of course, as per usual, please do like this video and send it to a friend because you never know who might be interested. And of course, leave your questions, suggestions, and constructive criticism down below in the comments because I read all of it and it helps me greatly to understand what you're interested in and tailor next episodes to you. See you next time.